Well, this upcoming weekend, it is the first meeting of 2022 between a couple of Western Conference foes, as Austin FC will welcome Minnesota United and a national TV audience on Sunday. We wanted to check in with Kyndra de St. Aubin, the television analyst for Minnesota United, and somebody even before Minnesota United was a member of Major League Soccer, was on your TV screens, Women's World Cup coverage, along with a myriad of other sports. Kyndra, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. I don't know if broadcasters around the league have caught on, but this is just my way of cheating in my preparation by just making you all do all the heavy lifting. And then once the match comes around, I just repeat out loud what you all tell me.
Hey, you know what? We all got to do what we got to do. And, you know, if this isn't, if we don't normally do it on a podcast or recorded, we're all chatting anyways, right? Trying to catch up and do the best research we can on the opposition. So this is a good way to do it.
Well, before we dive into the Loons, let's dive into you. You grew up just outside the Twin Cities, over in Stillwater, Minnesota. You played your college ball both with Wisconsin as well as Minnesota. Your husband, Bobby, played for the Hoosiers, so big Big Ten family. Let me have you put your analyst cap on. If you had been calling one of his matches, how would you have broken down his skill set and his ability out there on the field?
Wow, that's a tall task, especially if I know he's going to be listening to this at some point. Then I might have to adjust how I'm going to say this if we want to have a peaceful night. But no, I mean, he's a quick, strong soccer player, really good with the ball in his feet, skillful. He worked really hard in his youth days to kind of master those skills of 1v1, can finish. Good combination player. It's interesting that you asked me that, though, because we do not work well as teammates. We've tried that in co-ed adult soccer. You know, I say he doesn't pass the ball. He says I don't move off the ball. So we're still working on that, 25 years into our relationship and almost 19 years into marriage. But a great player, and I've always really enjoyed watching him play. And it was fun to see him at IU where he finished up. And then also he was originally drafted by the Minnesota Thunder, actually, and didn't take that opportunity because he actually, back in those days, they didn't make a whole lot of money. So he went the education and college graduate route instead and got a job in corporate finance.
Well, I was going to talk about the Thunder a little bit later on, but let's move it up here to dive in. First time I started following Minnesota soccer, they were already the Stars, whether it be at the end of their USL tenure into the North American Soccer League. But it really does date back Thunder, Stars. And then by the time they joined MLS, they had already become the Minnesota United FC Loons that we all know to this day. But when you're growing up, were you mainly following college soccer, or were you watching any of the local pro sides?
Oh, no, I was watching a lot of the local pro sides, and the Minnesota Thunder was so prominent in this community also because of the camps they run in the summertime. So I didn't ever attend the camp as a camper, but I did coach at the camps. So I was coaching alongside Manny Lagos and Amos McGee and all those legendary names that we could rattle off the list. And my husband, when he would come back in the wintertime from college break and whatnot, he would always play with the Minnesota Thunder team as they were looking for numbers and things like that. So Buzz Lagos is a legend around here, and what he did in high school soccer as well with St. Paul Academy. So some good rivalries, but it's really cool now because you go through the Stadium Club, and that's the level our broadcast booth is on at Allianz Field. And first and foremost, Buzz has his season tickets just outside our broadcast window. So that's pretty cool to see him and his family, but his kids are ingrained in the community here. Gerard Lagos, we see in the Stadium Club as well. So it's really fun. And it's like this weird full circle thing that we know soccer is this big world, yet little at the same time. And so when I come back now and got back involved in the Minnesota soccer community, being connected with those people that I recognized and worked alongside or played alongside growing up, it's really pretty phenomenal, and it's fun to see.
Yeah, when Buzz was done coaching, of course, later on, Manny, his son, would take over the reins, but Buzz slid in the broadcast booth. It's kind of a passing of the torch from him to you, but it sounds like he didn't go very far if his seats are just outside of the booth.
Yeah, I'm guessing he's probably keeping a little bit of an eye on us and an ear on us to see how we're calling the game. And I would always appreciate his feedback, and he's welcome in the booth anytime, and he knows that. And it's just a legendary soccer family, but I can't tell you enough how much they've done for the community here. And I mean, Major League Soccer would not be here without the Lagos family and what they did for soccer in this community. And it's really been fun to see it grow. And now my daughter playing as well. She's only 8, but really kind of getting into the competitive side of things. Of course, she doesn't want to listen to either of her parents because we know nothing, but taking it all in from her coach and seeing her enjoy the soccer games. I mean, she's better at pronouncing Bongagukle Flongwane than I am. So she's got the roster all figured out, and she likes to break it down with me after the Minnesota United games too.
All right, but before we dive into your current role with Minnesota United, you haven't spent your whole life in Minnesota. You got out for a while. You and your husband went down to Scottsdale, the greater Phoenix area, where you, when I say sports broadcaster, a lot of people use that term pretty liberally. What we do right now is live sporting events coverage, but sports broadcasters can also be your reporters who are covering as kind of a beat. I know you spent time in Milwaukee, you spent time in Arizona. What did you learn during that stretch, other than the fact that you were thankful you didn't have a lot of student debt that you were having to pay off with what little money we make those first few years?
Yeah, that's, and isn't that the truth? And we've all done these. You've probably done plenty of talks yourself with current college students and broadcast students and people that want to get into this industry. And really it is about putting in your time. And I always tell the students, don't say no to anything, because you never know what's going to come your way and what opportunity and who you're going to meet along the way. And we've met a lot of pretty incredible people in this industry. But yes, after I graduated college, we were living in Milwaukee for 4.5 years, and I was the Bucks and Brewers beat reporter, but covered everything. Started out actually with the Milwaukee Wave was my first beat. So professional indoor soccer down there with another legend in the game of Keith Tozer was the head coach at the time. And so yeah, that was, it's a really fascinating industry in sports, and I'm passionate about all sports, so it was easy for me to cover all sports. I wasn't one of those people that was like, I have to be on television and I have to cover soccer because I played it. Soccer was actually the later thing that I fell into, as well as television. I was in radio for most of my career and loved it. I mean, I absolutely loved learning the ins and outs of every sport and came to really respect and appreciate all sports, especially being the beat reporter for baseball, which was my least favorite sport because I always thought it was really long and boring. But then once I learned the game and I understood the intricacies and respected it a little bit more. And I think that's another thing that we all learn in this industry is you really learn to respect all aspects of all sports when you have to cover them and understand how much hard work it takes to play everything and do what those athletes do on every different level. So it was quite the journey, and I am clearly happy and pleased with where I'm at now. But there's something about just the competitive nature. And what I love about sports is the unknown. That's why you play the game, right? It's that quote that we hear all the time that you never know the outcome. That's what makes it fun. So I enjoy my job now with Minnesota United.
Well, the same way your coaches probably enjoyed your flexibility of wearing different caps, whether it be a center back or up in the midfield. I know producers love having you because they know you can fill a variety of roles. You can host at a desk where you're kind of driving the ship. You can report from the sidelines, and nowadays to be an expert analyst, a decade with Fox Sports, a couple of Women's World Cups under your belt. But let me ask you, what was the very first time you were asked to be an analyst on any sport? I assume soccer, but any sport, and how did that go for you?
Well, I was living in Arizona at the time, and you remember I'm pretty old. I'm almost 42. I'll be 42 in September. So when I started and when I was working back then, we didn't have the Big Ten network. We didn't have the Pac-12 network, the SEC network. I mean, we could go down the list of all the networks there are now where we are able to watch and witness all these great college athletes out there. So when I was living in Arizona at the time, I was doing radio, but ASU women's soccer was going to be on Fox Sports Arizona. They decided to broadcast a game. And so someone that I knew from covering all the other teams said, hey, would you like to be an analyst on this game for ASU women's soccer on Fox Sports Arizona? And I had never been an analyst before and really never been on television for that matter at that point. And so that was my first experience. And I remember not thinking too much about it as far as the actual soccer part of the game. Like, oh my gosh, how am I going to know what I'm talking about? How am I going to do this? It was more like the live open. Do we record it? Do we shoot it live? Making sure I had my notes down. And the other thing we all learn as television or radio broadcasters is there is such a thing as too much information. You don't want to have information overload in front of you and then you get lost in it. So kind of trying to find that right balance. And I remember the first game I did, I loved it. I mean, for me, calling a soccer game, even that very first one, was very similar to sitting on the couch with my husband and watching a match, watching a game. We sit there and we talk about it, and we don't break it down, but we will comment on it as it's going along, on what should have happened, what could have happened, what was wrong with that shot, what was, this pass, that run, why is the team struggling? So for me, I tried to be very relaxed in it and just go, wow, I know my stuff. I know this game. And now can I convey it to the viewer in a way that they can absorb the information? And maybe you're teaching some people about soccer that have never witnessed it or watched it before. And then maybe you're speaking to the people that have been watching it their entire lives, and trying to kind of find that balance. But that was my first experience, was Fox Sports Arizona, calling an ASU women's game. And then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah. Anytime I'm paired with a new analyst, I let them know we're going to do maybe a 2 or 3 hour broadcast. The hardest part of the whole thing will be those first 5 minutes when we're recording just the hello to the audience and maybe touching on a few key players, because once we dive into the game itself, you have spent your whole life in this sport, and just do your best to channel whichever coach was best at communicating the game to you. Try to channel that when you're communicating the game to everybody at home. But it sounds like for you, it all came pretty naturally, and obviously your career has been able to reflect that.
Well, and I will say this, I've been really blessed with my broadcast partners every step along the way, and producers, directors. I mean, we've all had them at different levels in different areas, and we could talk World Cup level, we could talk college level. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've broadcast games on the sideline of Iowa, in the Big Ten network, where you're sitting at a card table, field level under a tent, pouring rain, to doing a World Cup broadcast at, a World Cup semifinal. So every step along the way has been a tremendous experience and a learning experience. And I've worked with some phenomenal people. So I've been really blessed in that regard. And this business is really 99% about relationships, because you just never know whose path you're going to cross in the future, and when you're going to see those people again. And you can lean on those people, just like we are today, with information about the opposition or a league or a player or a coach. It's really always, it tends to come full circle. So I've really been grateful with my experiences and the people that I've worked with and for.
All right, so let's get closer to diving into the task at hand, the match coming up on Sunday, as Austin will host Minnesota. For the Loons to get here, I know there'll be a plane, but let's pretend they're taking that path down I-35. I want you to go back and channel Ashley O'Brien and tell us about that traffic.
Wow, you really
Interstate
did your
35.
research. You really did your research here.
We mentioned you have worn a variety of hats. That includes traffic reporter. I want to mention I'm a little disappointed in Ashley O'Brien, only because in Austin I grew up with traffic reports, and the person who gave those traffic reports was a reporter named Elaine Closure.
I was not that clever, but at the time I was living in Phoenix, and I was on 2 different radio stations. I was doing Sports Center updates and anchoring and things on the radio station there. In that channel, I was Kyndra de St. Aubin. And then I had to come up with a different name to be a traffic reporter at Metro Networks, because if anybody knows how traffic reporters work, you call into all sorts of different stations, right? You're not just one, you're in a central hub, and you may do traffic for every different station in town. And so I had to think of another name, and I went with my middle name and then a name from my husband's family as my last name. And there were times absolutely where I got mixed up on who I was at what moment on what station, and had to correct myself mid-sentence. And I even did some traffic for Las Vegas from Phoenix, which was always a little interesting, hearing what was going on, at 6 a.m. in Vegas, near the Strip, compared to downtown Scottsdale. But yeah, I'm excited for this matchup against Austin, because I think that both teams are in a not by any means a precarious position, but I think Austin, as we all know, started out red hot with those 10 goals, and then they go and they don't even get a shot on goal at Portland. So people are trying to figure out who is this Austin team. But I've been a huge fan of what Josh Wolf has been doing with that group since they came into the league last year. And they had a challenge in front of them, playing all those games on the road to start the year. And we all know how difficult it is to play away from home in this league. And now you've got your pieces kind of really starting to fit in nicely into that puzzle and get a little bit more comfortable. And Minnesota is much the same way. You get some international guys in, and they come in June, July, August. They come in mid-season, and they're trying to adjust to the league, to the travel, to the climate, to the style of play, to what is being asked of them. And Minnesota is in much the same scenario when you look at who they've got on this team, and they just suffered their first loss clearly to Seattle, which Seattle is no slouch, but a loss at home was not ideal for Minnesota United. But Seattle, was on fire that night. They're getting their guys back into health. And I think Minnesota United sort of ran into a buzzsaw with what Seattle was bringing to the table at that time.
Austin and Minnesota met twice last year. You all hosted Austin twice. In fact, you all hosted Austin twice before Austin ever played a home match. You could argue Allianz Field, and Kansas City also has this claim, was the home of Austin FC before the 5-1-2 here in the state capital. Austin won that first meeting 1-0 on May 1st. That's their last away victory in Major League Soccer. You all took the next two matches, both later on in the summer, as well as I believe in October, when you were kind enough to join Adrian Healy and Michael Lahoud on their Twitter Spaces. So we're really leaning on you pretty heavily here. But when you just look at Minnesota from abroad, since joining Major League Soccer, I assume each and every year there's a pretty high bar of expectations, including a couple years ago making it against that Seattle side in the Western Conference Final.
Yeah, and I think, you guys have experienced it now too, being an expansion club. There's a pressure on you, but sort of a weird pressure, because you don't know exactly what is going to come of the group. It's a new team. Even if you've had a history in that city, in that state of soccer, like Minnesota did and Austin did as well. Adrian Heath talks very highly of the soccer community in Austin, having spent his time there before the team moved to Orlando City, and always knew, and he always says, he knew that soccer was going to make it there. So when you're an expansion club, you have this weird expectation that you want to come in flying, and you have this beautiful new stadium that you want to prove to the supporters and the fan base that this team is going to give you a show every single night if you're going to sell out, and they're going to pay their good hard-earned money to pay for the tickets. And I think Minnesota United was much the same way. And they came in a little bit differently in 2017. And you're always kind of compared to the team you come in with. And we came in with Atlanta United. And it wasn't just about money spent. It was about, they really started putting their roster together in 2015. So they had a bit of a head start, whereas Minnesota United was sort of scrapping and clawing to try to get themselves situated and get an appropriate roster for the pitch. And then, you're trying to get, build a brand new stadium in 2019, which opened Allianz Field. And every single year they've just been climbing up and up and up, and the roster gets better and better and better. But one thing that has never changed and never wavered has been the support of the fan base here. And I think that just tells you that this deep soccer culture in 2017, when there were days where it was tough to call the game, it was tough to find the bright spots in that 30-minute post-game show. And we've all been there, and we've all done that, where you're trying to really find and focus on the bright spots, but also be correctly critical in those moments of what the team needs to do to be better. And then you look ahead, and you just talked about it, losing to Seattle in the Western Conference Final, and then making the playoffs 3 years in a row. I think these are all things and milestones that everybody here at the club can hang their hat on, from the coaching staff and the ownership all the way down to the kit guys and whoever else is on the staff, which everybody needs, everybody, training staff, to try to stay fit and healthy. And every year it's been an improvement. The roster is phenomenal. The depth is amazing. And that's, I expect no different, and they should expect no different, but to continue to climb here in 2022.
Just want to give a nod to the Dark Clouds. Always enjoy their contributions to the match, and dating back to the lore of the Iron Skillet, I believe, back in the NASL days, to try to motivate the team on set pieces. But let's build through this team, starting with Dane back in goal. I know he was standing on his head to start the season with some brilliant performances. How have you seen him come along here early in his career?
Well, I think he's been, I don't want to say a bright spot, but I think he's sort of as advertised. You saw what he did. I know it's college, and not, some people poo-poo college these days, which I don't fully understand why, because in the American game, and in the United States, I think it still serves a massive purpose in what Major League Soccer, and even the, as we talk about MLS next and these other leagues and academies, is trying to accomplish. Dane has been phenomenal for this team, just from a competitive standpoint. I mean, that's what you want every day at training, is you want competition. And how can you find that competition? Well, you get two quality starting goalkeepers, and a Dane St. Clair and a Tyler Miller, who came over from LAFC. And every single day at training, they're learning from each other, but they're also competing against each other, and they're making their teammates that are shooting on them the best that they can be. Who's putting in those crosses, knowing that Dane St. Clair is going to come off his line and snag it or punch it out? Or where do you need to put that ball in the right spot at the right time to make sure that it's in a good location to beat a goalkeeper? So when you throw someone like Dane St. Clair in the net, he's good with his feet. He's got good range, good communication skills. If you've ever heard him screaming and yelling back there, now he was in the mix for the Canadian national team this last go around when they qualified for the World Cup. So I can't imagine what it was like to be on the bench for that moment for him. So yeah, I mean, Dane's been awesome. I'm excited to see what comes. He was drafted, in 2019. I was there for the draft, and him and Chase Gasper both were roommates at Maryland and played together at Maryland on the national title team, and then got drafted here to Minnesota United. So that was a fun moment as well. And Dane's been great.
When you look at the 4 guys in front of him on that back line, what's the biggest difference from a year ago to this first month of this season?
Oh man, with the back 4, well, just the fact that the first, 5 games of the season, we haven't had the same back 4 in a game yet. And it's a couple years in a row now where they've had to kind of maneuver some pieces due to health concerns, due to some issues, injuries and whatnot. And what I think you can really, once again, hang your hat on is the fact that regardless of who Adrian Heath puts in that back line, allowing goals has not been the issue in the first 5 games. And I talk about Minnesota just lost their first match, but they'd struggled to score games. They've not scored more than a goal in a game yet, but giving up goals has not been the issue. So once again, that back line just finds a way to get it done. Michael Boxall is always kind of the steady Eddie in the center back role, regardless of who you put alongside him. Brent Kallman has been great and stepped up when we've had to move Bakai Dabasi out to the left-hand side with the absence of Chase Gasper. And then, of course, Roman Metanir has been coming back and working his way back from a hamstring injury. And just, slowly but surely, when you have the depth in the back line, it allows you to take your time with bringing those guys back. So DJ Taylor out there, regardless of Hassani Dotson can fill in. They've got O'Neal Fisher. We just added Kamar Lawrence that can play on the left-hand side. So again, quality and depth. And we know, and every team knows that you're going to need that going forward because this is going to be a tedious MLS season with the amount of midweek games and the schedules and international call-ups and things like that. Not to mention, some teams that are dealing with CCL, and then you're going to get US Open Cup in the mix. So I would say quality of depth in the back line, and the guys have just stood firm.
Ethan Finley joins Austin this year, so there's that absence, whether it be in the starting lineup or depth for Minnesota. How does that connection up top look right now for Minnesota? And you mentioned just about 1 goal at best per match with the midfielders and the men up front.
I think that's been sometimes it's a head scratcher, and this isn't just for Minnesota United. I think this is for teams across the league, is how do you find that chemistry, and not just chemistry on a one-off game, but consistency. And it's not always just about finding the goal scoring number 9. I mean, clearly that helps when you have a goal scoring number 9, but you've seen it now with your attacking players. And we've talked a lot about Sebastian Driussi and what he's now bringing in his second year in the league, having come in mid-season last year. You can understand and see the comfort level with these players. So Luis Amarilla was here before, but he didn't play with Emmanuel Reynoso. So now Luis Amarilla is back in Minnesota, and I think he's clearly capable of scoring goals. But sometimes it takes time to establish that chemistry and that camaraderie with the player that's sitting underneath you as the number 10. They are like-minded players. They have similar styles. They both want to make the other better, and they want to ultimately win games and score goals. But it still takes a little time to figure out where that player is going to be, when he's going to be there, how does he want the ball, where does he want the ball, what pace does he want the ball at. So on the right-hand side, if you have Robin Lod, who likes to cut inside and get it on his left, well, he also wants to tuck in and combine, right? I mean, he wants to combine with Emmanuel Reynoso, with Luis Amarilla, and whoever the other central midfielder is. We've got Kerben Arriaga that we've added to the lineup in the roster from Honduras as well, who's another threat in midfield. Hassani Dotson can play centrally and be that late arriving run on top of the box if you need it. We all saw with Joao Paulo what he could do in that late arriving run on top of the box in his goal against Minnesota United last week. So it's nice to have that goal scoring threat. And then on the left, depending on who you go with, Abu Danladi got to start last week. Is it Franco Fragapane? Who are you going to put out there? But every player brings a different quality. So as you're rotating some of those players, maybe in the wing spaces, in the attacking spaces, in the holding midfield roles, your number 10 and your number 9 are kind of having to adjust how they play at the same time learning each other. So the goals will come. I don't doubt that one bit, because there are plenty of quality in that front four for Minnesota United. It's just going to be a matter of, when do the goals come? How consistently do they come? You can't just have a one-off game. And as they continue to learn and hopefully not get frustrated. We all know goal scorers like to score goals. So when they start having a drought, you just don't want them to get too frustrated or try to push, force the issue. And I think it's a good group of guys, and it'll start clicking.
I think Austin saw enough from Fragapane last year. Maybe y'all want to try somebody else just for some variety.
Yeah, I think I heard whispers about that at training today earlier, trying to figure out. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? I mean, Franco was out for a little bit with an injury. He's working his way back, but you have plenty of other options to throw out there. And that was the beauty of Ethan Finley. Like, you knew exactly what you were going to get every single game. And I'm sure Austin fans are seeing that. Like, he may not be the flashiest of players, but you know what you're going to get. And you're never going to lack effort from an Ethan Finley. So sometimes it's just a matter of consistency and knowing what you are going to get from your teammate, that it makes it easier for the others to play in and around that player when you know exactly what that player is going to bring every single match.
You mentioned the goal from Joao Paulo. I believe Callum Williams, your broadcast teammate, called it a Brazilian goal, marrying a couple of words there. What's that partnership been like with Callum? I know I heard you mention that you all actually never had any test broadcast together. Both of you were hired, and then we're just assumed that it would be the great bond that it's proven to be.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to just being really grateful and blessed with broadcast partners. First of all, what's the first thing you can ask from a broadcast partner is that they do the work. If you have a broadcast partner that shows up and they've done the research and they've done the work and they've looked at the opponent, they've watched some tape, they follow the league, then that's like the first step in knowing, like, okay, check that box. I have someone in my booth with me that is willing to do the work and put in the time. And that has never been a question with Callum, ever. He lives, breathes, eats soccer. And if there's another thing in there, I'm sure he does that too, because I mean, this guy watches every league. He'll have like 3 or 4 monitors going at the same time. He's doing all sorts of stuff. So this is a guy that lives, breathes, eats soccer, and never had to question his work ethic and showing up and putting in the work in beforehand. And then second of all, we both are in the camp of making each other better. We understand that this is a team sport. The broadcasting side is a team sport. You're never trying to one up the other person. You're never trying to undercut somebody. You're not trying to manipulate the situation to make yourself look better. This is about, if you look good, I look good, and we look good together. And then we will be one of the best broadcasts that we can be for Minnesota United and for this league. Quite honestly, we look at it as our job to represent this league across the world as it continues to be picked up and on different networks and, whatever it might be, ESPN Plus or otherwise, where everybody everywhere can watch your games all the time. So I've been very blessed, and we have a great chemistry, a great camaraderie. I'm probably a little bit more, I try to get him to loosen up every once in a while. Sometimes the British, when they're broadcasting, can be very, very formal. And so, I mean, when I say that I'm punching him in the arm when something good happens, I mean, that's real. I'm not joking there. Like, if we're close enough where I can hit him, I will, out of excitement. And just, I think we're both, me for sure, I'm not afraid to laugh at myself because I screw up plenty of times. I've made up plenty of words on a broadcast and just not take myself too seriously, because if we do that, then we'll all be screwed if you take yourselves too seriously and can't laugh at yourself as long as you're professional. But Cal's been great. Never had a practice run. And I think both of us have also worked with enough other people that like we have an adaptation ability. Because and when you do college games, you could be with a different play-by-play every game, and covering different teams every game. You're not just, assigned one team like we are with Minnesota United and whoever they play. So I think we've both been pretty flexible in our careers and just learned to roll with the punches and roll with the flow. And that's what live sports is. That's what live television and live radio are. And it's been a great run now in our 6th season.
This Sunday, national audience on FS1. It'll be, again, Austin hosting Minnesota. That means you get, in theory, the day off. How will you be tuning in?
I'll be watching on television. I mean, It's crazy because normally when it's a nationally televised game, Cal and I will still do the radio call. And even when it's on the road, we'll go into the studio here and do the radio call. Well, this year we decided that, or we didn't decide, somebody decided that the radio guys will continue to do the radio call, even when it's a nationally televised game on the road. So technically, yes, we do get the weekend off. But I will be tuning in to that game and every other game. And the women's national team plays this weekend. So there's always a full slate of soccer to keep an eye on, and I'll be watching on television on FS1 for sure, and rooting Minnesota United on. Sorry to say, Austin fans, but ultimately want to see a good game. But 3 points on the road wouldn't be too bad either for the Loons.
Before we wrap things up, going back to your approach as an analyst, obviously when you watch the game as a fan, you're watching on a monitor, but you've called plenty of games now off of monitors. From a play-by-play standpoint, I've probably done a dozen different sports for TV off monitors. Soccer is one of the easier for a play-by-play guy. You're following the ball. But for an analyst, how does it affect the way you watch things develop and perhaps feel like you're able to do your job?
Well, sometimes it really depends on the camera angles. I mean, we are very dependent, especially when it's a road game. We are dependent on the home crew and their camera angles and how tight they decide to show it or what they decide to cut to. And we have to appreciate and understand that if it's an Austin home game, they may cut to a certain Austin player or the coach or an assistant coach or somebody that they're talking about in their broadcast. But from a playing on the pitch standpoint, it really depends on the cameras, how tight they are, what are they zoomed in on, what are they zoomed out on. And we understand everybody's doing their absolute best with the resources they have. So we know that. I mean, calling a World Cup game off a monitor is very different than calling a local MLS game just because of the amount of resources and cameras that you have available to you. But I do think that it's hard for me as an analyst to know what is developing around the ball, that's not on the ball, that's not on camera. And we know that with soccer, it is one of the biggest things with soccer is the runs off the ball, the big switch of field. I mean, and that's just talking about the actual play. What about if someone went down hurt? What if there's a scuffle over there? Who's warming up, on the end line to get ready to come in? All those things, when you're calling it off a monitor, you have no idea aside from just the sense and the feel of the game, who's yelling at who out there. But I think ultimately from an analyst perspective, trying to tactically break down the game is very difficult off a monitor because you have no idea. Sometimes it's hard to tell even what shape a team is in when you're calling it off of a monitor. Has somebody pushed up wide? Have they switched sides? Is there a giant gap in midfield? Is there what's happening between the back line and the midfield? Who's being the connector? Is Emmanuel Reynoso drifting out wide so he can try to find the ball in the game or draw a defender out of that space? So those are all things that on a monitor make it very difficult. But as you just stated yourself, you've done plenty of games and plenty of sports off a monitor now. And I think it's sort of the way of the world now. And this was even pre-COVID. There was a lot of networks and teams and sports going that way. So we've gotten used to it, but it's not an ideal scenario for sure. And I do believe that at some point this season, we will be traveling back again for television games on the road for Minnesota United, but not meant to be quite yet.
Well, sadly, these two teams only meet twice. We will not see you in person in Austin this year, but hope to have you at Q2 Stadium in the near future. For the past decade, I know when people compliment me on a broadcast, what they really mean, whether they know it or not, is my analysts did a great job and I stayed out of their way. I know a lot of your broadcast partners have benefited from working with you, and certainly the viewers have benefited from hearing your perspective throughout a match. Thrilled that you were able to join us this week. Appreciate your time, Kyndra.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and all your hard work. And we, us broadcasters have to stick together. So I appreciate you.
It's hard to feel bad for ourselves at any point, though, when we get to show up to Allianz Field in Q2 Stadium and just take in those great environments for a match in Major League Soccer. Again, look forward to it. Austin FC against Minnesota United Sunday on FS1. Kyndra will be tuning in like many of you as well. And good luck the rest of the way.
Thank you. Thank you as well.